Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to bring you another video from my cronies. This one is kind of just a fun, opinion-driven video where we're going to talk about Necrons and new releases. Obviously, I have no insider information on any of this. This is all a personal pick, but as winter is quickly approaching and we are going to be seeing a new Necron Codex, it starts to gauge questions on what models could see a refresh, what models could see a whole new data sheet, and everything. We've heard rumors people are looking at into Orkin since he's no longer available online. Could he be seeing a completely new model? And with that, I wanted to kind of touch base on my personal opinion on what 5 units or kits would most deem a model refresh go in 10th edition. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. Turn on the bell for notification, get notified on all the content that we bring you here on the channel. With that being said, let's jump into a couple of the units. Now, mind you, I am going to bunch up some of the units together, and I think it'll make sense in a minute here. So we're actually going to have quite a few data sheets that are going to be comprised, and it's not just going to be 5 data sheets, because there's a couple of reasons with a certain few. Some of them I will separate off, and I'll explain my reasonings why, and, well, let's just jump into it and get talking about these. Starting off with number 5. Number 5, all of the Necron named characters that are not Xeris. So anyone who's played Necrons for years has seen and knows we got all these fine cast models. And the fine cast models were recasts in some case from some pewter models and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically all of our characters, Orkin, Emotech, Zarek, or not Zarek, Zarek's the only one who's not. What's his name? Xandric, that's what I was going for, are all fine cast models. And these are definitely guys that could use an update. The model's positioning is very stoic, and in some ways and shapes and forms, the models are kind of, wear and tear from a different time of Games Workshop. I know that Trazen has a huge following online, and his model is, well, relatively old, and he could use a model update. We've talked about it with Orkin. Emotech is supposed to be second in command, yet he's one of the smaller ones. And basically anything like these, any of these character models that represent an overlord but are on a smaller base should gauge the question that this model probably needs an update. Now, the reason I, again, put all the Necron named characters into it is they all kind of fall into a series of those fine casts when Games Workshop switched over. So I think that all of these are models that could benefit from a refresh. Do I think they're going to refresh all of them? Probably not. But I definitely think that they are ones that could use the refresh, very much so. Number 4, Cetan Shards of the Deceiver and Nightbringer. So this one's probably going to give me a little bit of heat, because Nightbringer is kind of iconic, the Grim Reaper of it. But as we saw the release of the Void Dragon and him on a much, much larger base than other Catans, it gauges the question on, is the Nightbringer too small? Is the Deceiver too small? And for that matter, I actually have a Deceiver and a Nightbringer that are the old school metals, a pewter model. And if you look at the fine casts, it's the exact same thing. They just changed the molding over. So they're kind of out of date with that. I definitely don't think both of them could, but I do think there's a possibility. There's 1 to 2 possibilities I'm kind of wondering with here. Either A, we get a new Catan shard. So if you go into some of the lore with Xeris behind Pariah Nexus, and I'll try and make this quick, we'll talk about this in another video. There is an ending in Pariah Nexus where a Catan shard gets cracked open and starts going crazy. I could see that going 1 of 2 ways. There is still Catans that we have not seen in the game, and there's still Catans that are considered lost. We could either A, see a new Catan, or B, update one of our originals. I personally would rather see a new Nightbringer, a bigger Nightbringer, a massive Grim Reaper that's the base size of like a Void Dragon. I'd be cool with that. Yes, I know in play terms it might not be as good because of the smaller base, but come on, it's the Nightbringer. He needs to be big and opposing. When you look at like Mortarion, Magnus, even Gilliman, and then we have the stilty Nightbringer. I think Nightbringer deserves better than that. Deceiver, I think it's kind of fitting, more elegant, for what he is. But the Nightbringer, man, he could really use that update. So that's why I put both of those shards at the number 4 spot. Number 3, Catacomb Command Barge / Annihilation Barge. So in my opinion, these things are just old. When the Catacomb Command Barge first came out, this was the model that we got. And I remember at that time, it was a model that was a transport, actually. It was a chariot transport. So you could put your Lord or Overlord inside. It was kind of cool. It led to some motifs of the Overlord flying in there and then just doing a backflip out of the thing, landing on his feet, and then running in and hitting someone with Mind Shackle Scarabs. I know I probably just gave someone PTS from hearing Mind Shackle Scarabs, one of the scariest broken things that Necrons have ever seen. But it was cool. And it was a cool, unique thing with the chariot. Now it's kind of an all-inclusive. It's not a transport. It is a character in its own right. And while the Annihilation Barge is acceptable, it's a gun. It's a gunboat, and it does what it's supposed to be doing. The Catacomb Command Barge just feels a little bit lackluster. You know, the look of it, it doesn't really have the attack characteristic. And when you kind of think about it, and I'm sure in the comments section, maybe someone can explain it a little better, but when this thing floats across the field and then gets in the battle and the Overlord has an Overlord's blade, how exactly is he attacking with that from the back of the chariot? I can understand the commands and the orders and the buffs and all that stuff all day. However, with that blade, like, what are we doing? We're coming in here, turning the thing sideways and just smack them on the face as we drive by. It doesn't feel like it makes that much sense. I really feel like that model could definitely use a refresh. Same with the Annihilation Barge. You know, we're moving to a realm of dreadnoughts getting bigger. I think the Catacomb Command Barge and the Annihilation Barge are definitely a unit that could use a refresh. Number 2, the Necron Lord. So I named all the characters, all the named characters in the source. But now we're getting down to the Necron Lord, the actual Lord model himself. And we've seen an Overlord that's reappeared. We got a new Overlord in the Indominus set. But what about the basic Lord? Especially with Lichguard and needing a Noble, we really don't have a Lord model that is not a fine cast, nor have we since the Pewters. And I feel like when I said, like, the Necron named characters and the epic heroes are not necessarily something that's going to be required and used as much. We don't have just a generic Lord aside from the fine casts. And I think out of everything, really down to it, aside from those epic heroes, the Necron Lord is lacking. And we need a new character. We need a plastic that is a just generic Necron Lord. We got 9,999 lieutenants. There's a Space Marine character for every month of the year that you could take as a captain, a lieutenant, everything else. Why do we not have just a basic Necron Lord that isn't the fine cast model, and let alone that fine cast model that is a fine cast of the original, like, Necron Lords. Only one model that predates before it, and that's the one that looks more Aztec-y or Pharaoh-y with the law runs. And honestly, in some ways, I'd rather see that come back as a regular Necron Lord. He was pretty cool looking. The Necron Lord is just so basic and so wimpy looking that we need a basic Lord, especially when it's a generic unit like that. I think that is long overdue for having just a basic plastic kit for a Necron Lord, and I really feel very strongly behind that one. Hopefully a lot of you guys agree on that one. So before we get over into our number 1, I want to go through a couple honorable mentions. There were some ones that I considered to make this list, but didn't for one reason or another. So here are a couple of the quick honorable mentions, one of which, Lichguard, Triarch, and the Triarch Praetorians. I feel like the Triarch Praetorians look good. They look cool. They're good. They're fine. The Lichguard, to me, are just too small for what they do. While the guys with spears look good, the model looks strong. When you look at the shield and the guy with the shield, it feels like they are too thin and wimpy for what they're trying to be and how defensive they're trying to be. So that's one of the reasons that I converted up some of my Lich Guard that are a little more thick, so that they look like they're actually these beastly protectors. I feel like the Lich Guard with the spears, the size is okay, but the shield is not. So I feel like that's a unit that could definitely use a modeling update just to make them look more appropriate for how beastly they are in the field. Another one, the Transcendent Catan. Transcendent Catans have been around forever and actually just simply do not have a model at all. Now, mind you, right now, the Transcendent Catan is a model that you get from having a Tesseract Vault. But then you have to model the Tesseract Vault in a way that you can pull the Transcendent Catan out of it to be able to use the Transcendent Catan, or in some way if you want to switch back and forth, or build an obelisk and have a Transcendent Catan. So I think that the T-Catan is one that needs its own individual separate model. And again, as I said, maybe a new Catan, this might be something to see. It's now the Transcendent Catan does lead the possibility of having some cool conversions for your army. So I'm not against not having it. And if we're looking at the route of, okay, if we update the T-Catan, that means we're updating the Tesseract Vault. I don't think the vault needs an update at all. I think that one's fine. So it's kind of one of those 50-50s of like, okay, so to update this, do we have to update this? Or can we just get a new model kit that is a Transcendent Catan, which is separate from the vault itself? And last on this list is the Immortals, the honorable mentions. Immortals, I think, are good-looking models. They're probably one that doesn't necessarily need an update because they look good. They do well for being, they're basically 3 kits. You have Gauze Immortals, the Tesla Immortals, and then you have Death Marks, and all of which the models look good. They're sized appropriately, they're based appropriately. I can't really say that they need to be updated. The only thing that goes against them is the age of the kit versus some other kits. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, I would be cool with them getting an update, but I mean, update their data sheet, please, because they're really not that great right now. But at the same time, too, they're not that old, they're not that bad, they're not that terrible, and they're all around a very good functional kit in the long-term scheme of things. All right, so it's time for number 1. The number 1 unit that, in my opinion, is most crying for a data update is Locust Destroyers. My number 1 pick is Locust Destroyers, and there's a couple of reasons to this. Number 1, as I said with the Lord, something that I did leave out with the Lord that I'll bring up here too, they're realistically, right now, as I'm going through and thinking about it, there is only 2 units in the Necron army that use the little green rods in their kit still. One is the Lord model that I mentioned before, and the other is the Locust Destroyers. So we got an upgrade with the Heavy Destroyers and got this big beetle-looking thing, and it's pretty cool looking. I like it. But the regular Locust Destroyers got nothing. They're still the same model, still the same kit, and this is an old kit. This is when we shifted over into the Monolith end of 3rd edition Codex plastic Necron era. This is the model from the plastic switchover, the Locust Destroyer, which is the same for the Locust Lords as well. The Locust Lord is just a kit that is basically just an upgrade kit that has a spear and a Resurrection Orb option or Staff of Light option. So these are all super old. And again, you have those green plastic rods. And while the green rods were really cool, and they do add a very unique color to the Necron army, they're all green. All of them are green. I've seen third parties that you can get a different color for your army. But you know what's another way to also get different color guns for your army? paint them a different color. And a lot of times, especially with those green rods, you run into the risks with the Lord specifically, and the Locust Lord too, where it sits in a way that if you touch it the wrong way, it pops out. And then if it pops out, you try and glue it back in. And heaven forbid that this is the one time where that super glue is either the wrong temperature, very liquidy, and touches more of the green that you want it to, and bam, you have this white mist over top of it. Now, there's a little trick to fixing that I've worked with over time, is if you use really, really, really like thin green, like ink, like the watered down paint. I call it ink from back in the day. Want to water it out a little more so it's very light, very little bit, and just touch where the white is on it. You should be able to stain it back to whatever color the green matches yours best. I'm not picking an exact green color because over time those things kind of, the color tone changes. So you want to try and match it as best you can. But if you really water it down a lot and just touch the white misting effect that goes over the green rod, you can basically stain it back to where it was. Yes, you can kind of wash it off and clean them up a bit, but once you put it back in the model, do you really want to start putting cleaning chemicals on it? Probably not. The Locust Destroyers are old. They are very old, and the model in all entireties is old. The way that they sit on their fly stands is obnoxious. In the size aspects of it, the depth of the flight stands constantly leads to them breaking. The fact of the guns, the way that they all just pop out of there. And in fact, the fact that these guys don't have a single secondary gun option. I really think that having Locust Destroyers that only have one gun option is really ancient, and we need a second gun option. Keep the gauze cannon, change it to something, keep the gauze cannon or change it up a little bit, but there should be another gun option to this unit so that they have more versatility in play. Now, I know a lot of other destroyers do not have that option, but these guys have been sitting on that forever. I mean, really, these guys have been sitting on this for ages. And it's just, most of all, though, the model needs that update. Even if you don't want to give them another gun, the model needs an update. Now, I don't think they should go to the realm of what Locust Heavies are, because they're heavies, they're bigger and bulkier. And I do think these guys need to be a little more agile and finesse-like and smaller. But the model needs an update. This is one of the only ones left that still puts those green rods in its kit. And yeah, it's time. It's time for those. And that's the biggest selling factor to me, is these are the only models left that are in production that have that green rod still incorporated into the unit. All right, guys, so there's my top 5 on what I think needs some kits and a couple honorable mentions in there. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments section, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching.